So, I want to say something in this third episode on the ancestors about the ancestral inheritance more broadly and literally, if you like, as well as non literally, in terms of what you might call the fairies. So, firstly, the wider cultural inheritance that we have, that is also the ancestors. It's the gifts, all the gifts from the past that come down to us. And just as, the ancestors in the more particular family sense has been disrupted by the idea that after death there's an extinction. Yeah. The ancestors, they're no longer with us because of that. There's also been a disruption in that wider cultural inheritance, in that the wider tradition, the wider mythology has also broken down. Because Christianity, which is the kind of holder and the bearer, the central mythology around which our culture revolved, has broken down. As the poet Yeats wrote in 1919, turning and turning in a widening gyre, the falcon can no longer hear the falconer. The centre cannot hold. Things fall apart. Mere anarchy is loosed upon the world. And so it continues. It's a great prophetic poem, but it talks about that falling apart. They just had the First World War. Maybe that was some kind of product of it. Communism, the replacement religion, if you like, was on the rise. And so, in many ways, we're rejecting our past. It's as if we're free, but also rootless. And so, this wider ancestral inheritance is something we need to find a way of coming to terms with and of engaging with it. Otherwise, we're just like Philistines. The value of it became clearer to me a few months ago when I started learning poetry. I started learning some poetry because I realized I needed to speak. So I started making these videos. It's not enough just to write. There's something in me that I have to give through speaking and that I have to express through speaking. And I began with learning poetry. And so, like those lines of Yeats just then, or the lines of Wordsworth from the last episode, to do with our birth is but a sleep and a forgetting. I mean, there's beauty in that. You can feel the beauty in that. Or there's the opening lines of Mary Oliver's Wild Geese. You do not have to be good. You do not have to walk 100 miles across the desert on your knees, repenting. You only have to let the soft animal of your body love what it loves. So I'm just giving you a few sort of opening snatches. I'm not going to inflict too much poetry on you. I don't know if you've read Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy or one of those series, the Vogon Space Commander. He punishes people by reading them his poetry. That's really funny. Anyway, but learning this poetry and reciting it, I just do it to myself here. There's a beauty and a wisdom in it, and it was like it was rewiring me. Beauty, if you allow it in, rewires you. It changes you. It may be through poetry, it may be through music, it may be through art, it may be through novels. Whatever way, maybe through the natural world. There's all sorts of ways that beauty. What is beauty? I'm thinking out loud here. Maybe beauty is like the symmetry, the patterning of the universe, the perfect patterning. the perfect resonance and congruence that is in the universe, that maybe the medicine wheel is a pale reflection of. The medicine wheel is saying the universe is ordered, the universe is patterned. Yeah. But it's not patterned in the sense of like an equation. It's a living pattern. It's something that's always unfolding and changing, like a kaleidoscope that's moving. But at every point, there's a patterning and a beauty in it. And our cultural inheritance is the bearer of that. Our ancestral inheritance is the bearer of that beauty. And nowadays, our ancestral inheritance is worldwide. Yeah. We have access to all the world's beauty and wisdom through the internet as much as anything. So don't diss technology. Don't go, I'm shamanic and I'm anti-technology. That just diminishes us. No, not at all. It's like anything, like all technologies. They can augment us. And in this case, it augments us into being the inheritors of the whole of humanity's culture and the indigenous traditions too. We can read about the Aboriginal Dreamtime. We can read the sayings of these Native American wise people. We can be inspired by the dancing and the connection to the spirits, the Mongolian and Siberian shamans. We're the inheritors of all of this. And it's natural for people to do that. This is why you've got to be aware of the voices who cry cultural appropriation, which is essentially a political point. Because humans have always taken from other traditions. It's our nature. We're creative. We're open. So this is the ancestral inheritance in the wider sense. So educate yourself. Don't just approach shamanism in a narrow way. Don't approach anything in a narrow way. I've heard it said, amongst astrologers, they can just focus maybe on learning astrology. It's like, no, you need to read the whole culture and set it in the context of your whole culture. And it's the same with shamanism. Read the great novelists. That's what I love to do. I read novels more than anything. I don't read about shamanism. I do certain books. Yeah? But I love to read novels because they're stories and they're insights into characters. And so we need to set our shamanism within this great cultural inheritance we have, for which, as I said at the beginning, there's been a disruption. And in many ways, we're rejecting it. And in some ways, we need to reject it because there was a dogmatism and a tyranny within it, within the Christian tradition. It had become a rigid religion. There were reasons it fell apart. It doesn't mean it hasn't got value in it. There's profound teachings in there. But it always had its limitations. It always had an issue with nature, putting humans above nature, seeing heaven, which is somewhere else, as being where you really want to get to, in this realm as a place of the devil, the creation of the devil. So there were issues in there which were anti-shamanic, if you like, anti-indigenous. Indigeneity, if you like, is our biggest inheritance, our biggest ancestral inheritance. It's how people were for 99% of human history until these big collectives, their big religions, started to happen, started to be created as a way of, if you like, of holding those collectives together. But they became rigid and in many ways didn't serve us. And so eventually they fall apart. So we have this Just as with the family, we have an inheritance to grapple with, so do we have this wider cultural inheritance to grapple with. But don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. And make the effort to become educated, to become cultured, to know your culture. Otherwise, shamanism just becomes this one more little sect, one more little set of beliefs where you have these imaginary friends in the lower world and upper world that you go off to visit. But really, we need this wider culture within us, this knowledge. I mean, War and Peace, what a great book. But you need to apply yourself. It's over 1,000 pages. It's a great story, a huge panorama. That's part of it. It's Russian, but we have this inheritance from Russia. It's fantastic. Yeah. Or from Iceland, Independent People by Halldór Laxness. Yeah, he won the Nobel Prize. It's a great novel about a guy struggling to survive as a farmer in this hostile territory. And he's always up against it. But just the sheer beauty of the way Laxness describes the landscape and the life around this guy and the inner life of this guy and the struggles he goes through and just the sheer intensity of it. It lifts it outside of that bleak setting so that you can always, however bleak, there's beauty there. If you're in the desert, there's beauty there. And the great poets, the great writers, the great painters, they all show us that. And so we need to place our shamanism in this wide and deep cultural inheritance that we have. Get to know it. Make the effort. It does take effort, and we need to apply ourselves. We're used to having short attention spans. We're used to things happening quickly. You want to be a healer? Go on 6 weekends over a course of a year, and you'll come out the other end a shamanic healer. And it's not like that. It's like, yeah, you probably will do some good work, and it probably will change you, but it's so superficial, that approach. It's like our life, it needs to be in the context of this. We don't want to be shamanic Philistines. Any shaman in a traditional setting, let's put it this way, he'd have known the stories. This guy used to come and stay with me, traditionally trained Chippewa Cree guy. He knew all the stories. He probably knew 100 of them. He knew them in detail. He'd been trained in them. And he knew their meanings. He could expound them. So this is the meaning of our ancestral inheritance in a broader kind of way. It's a challenge to us to get to know it because there's depth and there's people far wiser than we will probably ever be. Yeah. In our past, in Europe, and all over the world. And maybe school puts us off because we're forced to, study Shakespeare in our teens. And for most of us, that's not going to mean anything. It's beyond us. Shakespeare's even beyond me now. I have to struggle with the language. Yeah. Okay. Maybe that's that one dealt with. So steep yourself in the best of our culture, both what's happening now and what there is from the past. Place your shamanism in that context. And it will help universalize it. Because that's what the great artists do. They take you out of your immediate culture into something universal. And that's also why it's good to read or watch or look from around the world.